So let's get to the Sunday school lesson, lest we get too far afield here. I had a thought a couple weeks ago, and it's kind of I keep a bucket list of series, kind of keep a bucket file rather of series, things that I'm kind of working on, that may come up in church that may not. I've got some things that have been on there for years. I've got, anytime I have a new idea strike me, I try to record it because I don't want to lose it. Because you never know what works out well. We're starting Bod for God in a couple weeks, which is a series. Granted, it's not original to me, but it's a series that I've been toying with doing for, I don't know, about 2 years, which reminds me, Chris, we need to talk money about that series. Or at least for the study. I know he's like, oh, crap. We have anxiety attack. We're starting, on Easter Sunday. We're doing a 4-part series on anxiety. Looking forward to that. A little anxious about it, but anxious enough that it was actually on. It was on last year and fell off my list, and then it's back on for this year scheduled. So that's good. I had this thought a couple weeks ago called deathbed podium. Last words of first importance. Seemed like a cool idea. All I have is a title and a subtitle so far, so I have no idea where it's going to go or if it's going to go. I only bring it up because if you'll notice on your handout, the one that's labeled 9-2, famous last words. And it's interesting reading through this list what some people's last words are. I love, my favorite has got to be General John Sedgwick. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. Apparently they couldn't hit an elephant, but they could hit him. I like Louis XIV. Why do you weep? Did you think I was immortal? And there's a lot. I am perplexed. Aleister Crowley. I don't know. I don't have sufficient context, I guess.
Well, he's an occultist. He deals in the occult. No?
Yeah, I mean, he was a Satanist. I know who he is, but...
No, but I'm just saying,
yeah.
I didn't know the name, but maybe because he's an occultist, maybe we should understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably maybe what he was getting into in the afterlife, because I think, from what I have read and seen, as you kind of cross that threshold, because it is more an immediate crossing than most people will give it, that I think that, if you happen to be conscious, you might actually spend about a split second between two, where you can actually, you're transitioning, but it's a quick transition, but enough that you can go, whoa, and you get that first reaction on this side of what's going on that side. Not everybody, but I've seen it occasionally, and so it may be that kind of thing where, this is not what I thought it was going to be, as he lands in a lake of fire. Maybe he thought he was getting a party. I think my favorite movie, have you seen Last Words in movies? I think one of my favorites was Doc in Tombstone. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So anybody else think of famous last words you know of? Or, I mean, you get Jesus' last words, and it doesn't count because he had like 7 things. He was Baptist. What's that?
Didn't he say it is done?
Yeah, he said it is finished. It is done. There's actually quite a few things he said right on the cross. And that's where I'm thinking about going with this particular series I talked about, was maybe like a 7-part looking at Jesus' last words. I don't know, though, because we have famous last words throughout the Bible. Nothing? All right. Well, where we're going to land today is in Joshua chapter 23 and 24. We were spared the military campaigns, which are a lot of geography and blood, guts, and gore. Probably more geography than blood, guts, and gore, because you can only get so many. And this guy took an arrow to the eye, this guy took an arrow to the toe, and this guy took a javelin to the midsection, and there's only so much that you can do. Right, right. But what we find in Joshua 23 and 24 is actually we're now approaching the end of Joshua's life. And so these would qualify as his final thoughts, his final words to the nation. Now, he has been an influential leader. I mean, he was no Moses, Moses led the people out of the promised land, all the miracles, the word of God, the whole thing, that he set up with the religious system, the national system. But Joshua was really the one who took what Moses did and implemented it. Joshua was the one who led the armies into Canaan. He was the one who fought up and down the land of Canaan. He was the one who had to have them actually settle the lands by lot, as Moses had dictated a generation before. It was Joshua who did all of these things, and Joshua who kept it all together. I may be skipping ahead, but probably one of the saddest things that we're going to read, and I imagine we'll get to it in the next lesson or two, is actually in the book of Judges. Starts off, Joshua and his generation died, and the people immediately fell apart. Judges is this horrific cycle of falling apart, getting it back together, falling apart, getting it back. It's just terrible. It's kind of like how we live our lives, I guess, in some respects. So maybe it's very metaphoric in that response. Sure.
I am perplexed. It says, I am perplexed, Satan, get out.
Oh.
I think that was the complete. Aleister Crowley, famous occultist, I am perplexed, Satan, get out.
Yeah. Interesting, or no. That's funny. I don't remember that in the song, Mr. Crowley. So...
Wasn't bring you to Satan. Now, why would they tell you that?
Huh? Yeah, no, I know.
Bring you to Satan.
So I think, very likely he could have seen what he was getting himself into, and, that was his Smurf moment.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
But, and on the Christian side of things, you've heard about and maybe seen Christians who die, and all of a sudden, just right before they finally go, it's just this composition of peace, this very, wow.
That happened to my mom.
And so, it's reassuring if you get to watch it happen. I would be very scared if they freaked out right at the end. I've only seen one person actually die, and that was freaky enough anyway. So,
But I was never afraid of death anymore. When I watched my grandfather pass away, his whole body, I literally felt God come into the presence of Jesus, come in and take him home.
yeah.
And his whole body just went so relaxed. I'm like, that was awesome. As much as I wanted to
Right.
be on earth, that was awesome.
That was cool. Yeah. So that's the way you definitely want to go, not the kicking and screaming route. Now it could be, I have long, I've been saved for a long time, and I've always said and still maintain that I'm not afraid of death. I am, however, afraid of dying. I think David Crowder hit it right on the head. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. He had a point there. That's kind of me. So Joshua, here he is. He's getting ready to go, and so he has some kind of parting thoughts. And so we're just going to pick up a couple of these because I think they're instructive for us. If we start in Joshua chapter 23, and we're supposed to read verses 1 through 16. Let's just read verses 1 through 6. I think we should get enough there. Actually, let's go to verse 8. How's that? So, who wants to voluntold? Debbie, good.
Now it came to pass a long time after the enemies round about that Joshua was old and advanced in age. And Joshua called for all of Israel, for their elders, for their heads, for their judges, and for their he who has fought for you. See, I have divided to you the lot of these nations that remain, to be an inheritance for your tribes from the Jordan, with all the nations that I have cut off, as far as the great sea westward. The Lord your God will expel them from you. The Lord your God will expel them from before you and drive them out of your sight. So you shall possess their land, as the Lord your God promised you. Therefore, be very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of law and of Moses, lest you turn aside from it and to the right hand or to the right hand or to the left, lest you go among these nations. These who remain among you shall not make mention of your name of their God, nor cause anyone to swear by them. You shall not serve them, nor bow down to them. 8, he said.
Yeah, that's okay. I said 6, and then I changed my mind to 8.
But you shall hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day.
Okay. So Joshua is, summons everybody up there. He says, guys, I'm getting ready to die. Let me talk to you. And so people come, they listen. Joshua's, a bit of a national hero now. And it's interesting, in verse 6 is especially, therefore be very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. We sometimes think about faithfulness, especially. We look at guys like Joshua, we look at guys like Moses, we look at people whose lives, in our estimation, counted, especially counted for God. And we see people whose lives were faithful over the long term. And I don't know if you've seen or ran across anybody like that. Hopefully you have, somebody that you can look at and you go, wow, this person is kind of a model for me of how to be faithful, how to live my life. One of the great keys about faithfulness is that faithfulness requires us to take action. And we're going to talk about procrastination in the next service, so I'm not going to go too much there. But faithfulness requires us taking action. And he says, look, verse 6, therefore be very courageous to keep and to do all that's in the law. You would think, well, that doesn't take much courage. Okay, well, that whole surgery thing on the way in for men, very courageous. Let's face it. That's why they get it to the babies, because the babies don't know. But still, as a dad, having had 5 sons, it takes a bit of courage to have them do it. So, so you have that, but just to live so incredibly differently than the people around them. The Canaanites, whom they had defeated in large part, but not completely. And we get that sense, he says, look, like God's going to finish driving them out of here. God's going to, you're going to have to settle the land. They broke the back of all of the powers in Canaan, but that didn't mean that all the Canaanites were destroyed. It was then left to each tribe as they settled their region to finish the job, which of course they didn't do, which created a lot of problems later on. But he says, look, be courageous. You've got still work to do in your mission, but you also have work to do in keeping and doing all that's in the law of Moses, because what God gave Israel to be and to do was vastly different than their contemporaries, vastly different than their peers. There was nobody else on earth literally doing what the Israelites were doing from a religious national identity perspective. And he says, look, you're going to be unique. You're going to be different. Be courageous. Faithfulness requires action. Verse 8, he says, hold fast to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. He said, you've got to just keep doing. It requires continual action, that we continue to hold on to God. So, as we look at our lives as Christians living in the 21st century, in American culture, in Western culture as a whole, are we pretty unique as far as our culture is concerned? Yeah, I mean, we may not dress differently. Goodness, you could probably find somebody else that has this bad combination on today. We're not that unique in our exterior appearance, and yet in our values, in our priorities, we're very different. I mean, you line up another Republican, another libertarian-leaning conservative Republican next to any one of us, and even still, we're going to have some value differences, or we should. We're going to have some priority differences. Now, they may be a Christian as well, so they may be similar. We tend to trend that way a little bit, although there are Democratic Christians. Can you believe it? Like, I found a Facebook page, it was Christians for Obama. And I found another Facebook page, it was liberal Christians, because God didn't tell us to dump our brains. I was like, yeah, maybe he did. But it's interesting. There are conservative, or there are genuine Christians who are not politically conservative. Jimmy Carter, not a raging conservative, and yet very much Christian as far as I know and can tell. Bill Clinton, I'm not going to give you much for his Christianity. We obviously know he's not conservative. I think even the Southern Baptists have disowned him. He's just kind of a running joke. He doesn't run that far. But there are differences. The average person that you work with has differences in their priorities, in their preferences, in their values, in their views. Certainly when you start coming down to God and even to Jesus, oh my goodness, Jesus is very divisive. And so just that fact alone will make us unique. And so faithfulness requires that we take action, that we continue to hold fast, that we continue to keep and do what we have been given to do. Joshua 24, let's see, verse 1. Let's see, how about 1 to 5 and 6 to 13? Okay, Ashley, 1 to 5. TJ looks like he's got 6 to 13. He's giving me the eyebrow up. Close enough to your hand? Yeah. Except I think his is the right eyebrow, and I can't get my right eyebrow up. I go left. Anyway, we digress. Ashley.
Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at
Shechem.
He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your forefathers, including
Terah,
the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the river and led him through Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron and afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there and brought you out. And I brought you out.
Yep.
Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. So they cried out to the Lord, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Then you dwelt in the wilderness a long time. And I brought you into the land of the Amorites, who dwelt on the other side of the Jordan, and they fought with you. But I gave them into your hand, that you might possess their land, and I destroyed them from before you. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose to make war against Israel, and sent and called Balaam the son of Beor to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam, therefore he continued to bless you, so I delivered you out of his hand. Then you went over to the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you. Also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I delivered them into your hand. I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, also the 2 kings of the Amorites, but not with your sword or with your bow. I have given you a land for which you did not labor, and cities which you did not build, and you dwell in them. You eat of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant.
Wow, pretty impressive litany, wouldn't you say? And good job with all the names, too. Goodness. That's awesome.
It wasn't like, dang, there you go.
Just, he remembered the maxim when you're reading Bible names is just
going.
fast and confident. You just hit it, and if you read it differently than anybody else thinks it should, they'll just assume you're right and they're wrong. What's interesting, now Joshua is gathering all the people together, and he gives them what it sounds like a history lesson. I mean, doesn't that what it sound like we just read was just, God did this, and then God did this, and then God did this, and God did this, and the people are going, yeah, we were there, yeah, I remember that, yeah. And they're going, Joshua's getting old, he's getting senile, he must be dying, because here we go again. We just lived all this, Joshua. Some of it was a couple decades old. You get back to Moses, okay, so probably none of these guys had lived that part. Joshua had, okay, thanks, Uncle Joe, we got the story. And so he recounts in very short order this whole litany of things that God had done. Why in the world would he do that? Exactly, it's a reminder of God's faithfulness to the people of Israel. He says, look, I'm encouraging you to be faithful to God. Let me remind you of how faithful to you he's been. And he goes down through, did he do more than this? Yeah. But, here's the highlight reel. And Joshua said, God has done all of these things. He's been incredibly faithful. One of the things that will help us in our faithfulness is to trace God's faithfulness through our story. Is to just think back, what has God done for me? Because there's going to come a crisis point in our life where we're going to say, God, what have you done for me lately? And of course, in that moment, we won't be able to think of anything. And so it's important to be able to trace God's faithfulness in our story along the way. Leave some markers. One of the things that Kate and I have talked about doing, and we're at the end of January, we haven't done it yet, but we have a running mental list, is to put a jar, and anytime God does something, anytime something good happens, write it down, put it in the jar, and at the end of the year, open up the jar and see it's a Pinterest idea, but it's a good idea. And you can actually, as you get toward the end of the year, see all of the good things that have happened over the course of the year. What's that?
She goes to church.
Right. Yeah, not a bad idea. Photo jar, though, for that. And so, that's just tracing God's faithfulness. And then the last thing, and you can read it as you go through the end of Joshua 24, we need to kind of wrap up here, is that faithfulness is a lifelong pursuit. Faithfulness is something that, it's not something you wake up one morning and you go, I'm faithful. It's something you never feel like you've arrived there because there's always more to do. And really, you never do arrive there because the reality is at any moment in our lives, we could choose to become unfaithful, and that would define our existence rather than our faithfulness. And we know stories of people who've done that, messed up toward the end of their lives, and what we remember is their screw-up, not their entire life of faithfulness. Faithfulness is a lifelong pursuit. And so the three applications that we find coming out of the end of Joshua's life in his last words is just being faithful to God is a matter of action, not sentiment. We can't think about being faithful. We actually have to do it. It's kind of like me talking to my doctor and saying, yeah, I've been thinking about losing weight. And she says, we need to stop thinking about it and start doing it. We'll get to the bottom for God. Anyway, number two, we should teach the next generation about God's faithfulness in our own journey of faith. And so it's good for our kids to hear about what God has done in our lives. They may not have seen or witnessed all of it, processed all of it the same way, but it's also important for us to remember. And then remember, there's no stopping place. There's no retirement. There's no place to quit to. We have to keep going. So, famous last words. Maybe not famous, but good last words.
I find it funny that he's actually reminding them, saying, you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
God did everything. You
Yeah.
didn't build anything. You didn't harvest anything.
You didn't plant. You just,
I
right,
put
you
them
moved
the
in to
wall,
made houses.
But God killed them for you.
And even some of that, God had, that's the thing about the Amorites, there were a couple places where God used natural, currently existing political tension to forward his agenda. They didn't have to fight all the wars. They had to beat Moab, but Moab beat a bunch of other people first. Problem solved. And so even there, God saved them some blood, sweat, and tears.
My enemy, my friend,
Right.
my enemy.
No, it was their enemy, and they killed him too, but, still, they got some of the work done first. So, faithfulness is important. About a quarter of, so I'll see you all in 15. Father, we thank you for today. Help us to be faithful. Lord, that's our desire. Help us to learn from Joshua, we pray in Jesus' good name.